hate to start late. So thanks for coming. First of the summer meetings. I hope you enjoyed the wonderful smells as you entered from Jim's barbecue truck. That's going to be our lunch. He tells me he'll be ready at 11. So I would love it if we could be very close to an hour in this meeting today, but we'll do what we need to do to move it along. Those of you who know me well know that I don't sleep very well typically before these meetings. Last night was no exception, but it had very little to do with the content of the meeting today and everything to do with my grand puppy who showed up last night and decided he would sleep in the master bath because he's too big for his crate. That was a terrible idea. So if I begin to doze off,
We'll nudge you.
smack me. He also ate a 1-2-foot section of drywall off the wall. I think we're gonna get in the crate. All righty. First order of business is the approval of the May 24th board meeting minutes.
I move for approval.
Second?
And it's been moved and seconded that we approve these. Is there any discussion?
I'll be abstaining, I wasn't at the meeting.
Okay, and Debbie, you would need to abstain.
I am too.
Okay.
Did we get it corrected? It says Laura was present
Yes.
and absent.
That's correct.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, all in favor of that approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we are going to, I should have said this earlier, with permission of the board and our public, switch the treasurer's report with the water quality report so that we can be respectful of Sarah Powers from the SPIA school and her time. So Sarah, where did you go? Sarah. Oh, there you are. I can't see far away with these on. Hi.
I can likely speak loud enough that I don't need this microphone if everybody's okay with that.
Everybody hear her okay?
Okay, I have a few extra copies that I can leave behind it. The board has it within the board packet as well, so I'm going to sit this there for a moment. So basically what we see is normal trending, so we turn to the first page and we have temperature and oxygen profiles. Nothing is different from what we have seen in the past, so it's very keeping in similar trends that we see stratification in the lake, which is that layering of temperatures in the water column. In the early spring, it starts to onset that stratification and continues throughout the summer, which consumes the oxygen in the bottom waters of the lake. That's very typical of lakes across Indiana, with no exception to Lake Lemon being so. Reed Point doesn't tend to do that, so we sample here at Riddle Point over by the island, and then we also sample off of Reed Point. So we have two main sampling locations on the lake. At Reed Point, there's a lot more water coming in, so that mixes a lot more throughout the season. So we don't usually get that onset of stratification throughout the whole lake because reservoirs act, as we know, as kind of like a stream system and then turning into more of a lake-like system closer towards the dam as it gets deeper. So it's a lot more mixing in that portion of the lake as we have more sediment, more materials coming in from higher water flows. This summer was a little bit different, so with the temperature and oxygen graphs that I have displayed in the report for you, the summary, we do see, we have May samples from this year included in that, so we have May of last year in 2017, and then we have May of 2018 because we had already completed sampling before this report was given to you. So we do see that the water temperatures, while there's only 1 day in sampling difference between May 23rd of last year and May 24th of this year, we do have a lot warmer waters than were present last year, obviously because we had a lot warmer spring. We didn't really have spring at all. So the water temperatures are a lot warmer already than what we had in the past. We're going to be keeping an eye on that. We were out again last week sampling, and we'll be back again in August, so we'll keep an eye on that also to see if any other problems, or I wouldn't say problems, but challenges arise from those warmer water temperatures in the early spring. So that's all pretty typical. The next few pages give the water quality report in general that has all of the different parameters that we measure from each of the different sampling events. Last year we sampled in May, June, and August, as is typical. We're contracted to sample in May and August. The June samples are additional work because we're training our summer field crew. So So we sample those dates as well. So you can see the full water quality report there with all the different parameters. Nothing is out of the typical of what we tend to see at Lake Lemon in general. So those are a summary for you. If we continue on, we have some seasonal changes in the total phosphorus and chlorophyll. I apologize, I don't have page numbers. There we go. For some reason, I didn't get page numbers on this report, so I will update that as well. But we have seasonal changes at Riddle Point and Reed Point, and those are those graphs that you see that indicate the eutrophic conditions, what is above and what is below. And we have seasonal variability, which is what we tend to see year after year, the same lower in May, and then that tends to increase with more total suspended solids, which is the sediment and material coming into the lake. So that all tends to remain relatively low and consistent, except when we have rain events, such as we've had recently, that'll continue to contribute more sediment into the lake. And then we also have an increase in chlorophyll concentrations as we move through the summer. So the chlorophyll is the plant material, the plant pigments and the phytoplankton. So as that grows, you get more plant pigment, chlorophyll A, in the lake, which is very normal as well, what we expect to see in Indiana lakes. So those seasonal variability is continuing with the similar trends that we see year after year. So May is usually lower, June is lower, and then by late August, the values are higher. So we reach those eutrophic conditions. So then if we turn to the next page, we have a summary of the E. coli, the tributary samples from the lake. We are sampling many tributaries throughout the watershed. We've consulted with the lake manager as well as the board on adding different locations to try to dial into some of the challenge areas of higher levels of suspended sediment as well as bacteria coming into the lake. So on this report, I have many samples from 2017 as well as May and June samples from 2018. So we're including both normal water events, so when we have low flows, as well as high flow events when we have a storm. And I've indicated on these when it is a storm event. So on April 29th, we had a storm event. On June 14th of 2018, we had a storm event. And then we see the total suspended solids behind that as well. So we do see higher bacteria concentrations during those high water events. So on the next page, it actually has some dialed in tributary sampling areas, as was shown on the first page, of where some of these challenge areas that we added more sampling sites in 2017 to try to figure out where some of those higher bacteria concentrations are coming from within the Chitwood neighborhood. So we have a Chitwood stream site, which is what's coming into Chitwood, and then we have several different channel sites as well. So I really think that if you turn to these graphics, they help dial in and explain some of that. So I apologize, you will have to flip back and forth to what those actual sample locations are. And all the sample locations are listed on the front page of this. So if you have questions, you can actually see this large scale map that has all of them. But what we see is seasonal variability. We see the storm events are much higher in bacteria concentrations across the lake. So the top graph actually gives you the summary. I only provided one Chitwood location for the summary graphic so we could see different areas of the lake and where's the highest. And it's not consistent. So different places within the watershed at different times are contributing more bacteria to the lake. Overall, during normal water events, the lake side of the bacteria is not a problem. We haven't found under normal water conditions without excessive rainfall that at the Reed and Riddle Point sites, that those are above what we would say recreation standard of 200 colonies per milliliter or per liter. However, in most of the stream tributaries feeding the lake, those are high, even under normal water conditions. So even when the streams aren't flowing high, those are still high, the bacteria concentrations in those areas. So when we dial in a little bit more and we look at those Chitwood area samples, we can see those in the bottom graph. And what we see is the Chitwood Stream, which is the stream that comes in from the other side of the road that we were asked to sample there as well to try to see if the stream tributaries coming into the lake were contributing excessively to the bacteria concentrations within the lake. So we see the stream is actually the red circles, and the Chitwood Channel is the mixing area. And then we have sites 1 and 2, which are listed in this figure. So 2 is all the way back here inside of the channel where we don't have as many homes. And then the Chitwood 1 is the location just before that leaves, mixing with everything. And then the channel is actually internal within the channels to try to dial in on what's happening within those channels. And we have the stream over here. So the stream would be feeding in, and then we have water in here that it would be mixing with. So as you have a little bit of water coming in through this stream, it's then going to mix with all of this water out in all of those channels. So what you would expect to see is that it would decrease substantially from the stream to the end of the channel. So if the stream is higher and there is no other contributing factors to the bacteria, it would get lower by the time it leaves because it's mixing with a lot more water. But that doesn't happen. So what we think is occurring is a combination of multiple factors contributing to the high bacteria concentrations within Chitwood. So the stream is high, but there's other contributing factors to the high bacteria concentrations. It can't all be from that incoming tributary because there's not enough water coming in through it that would lead to the high concentrations of bacteria within that area. It's also important to note that it's not the only area with concentrations that high. Knob Creek on the other side of the lake is just as high. Bear Creek is just as high. So it's not isolated that we have high bacteria in one tributary. Yes.
I'm sorry, what do we think those other sources might be?
Other sources, so you have combination of things like agriculture, farm fields is going to contribute. So you have cattle in some areas ranging. You also have geese, but you also have septic systems within those higher areas of the watershed are going to be a contributing factor. There's also animals that live along these streams, not just from farm animals, but some people keep chickens, some people keep dogs that are relatively close to some of these streams. So all of those combined materials are going to contribute, but it can't be isolated to just one single factor. But I do think septic systems is likely part of the problem, but it's many different things. Does that help? Sorry,
So how much worse is it, like, this time than last year? I'm trying to follow along on your graph, but, I mean, was there an alarm last year, and is this the alarm this year, or?
So what is important to note is these are, during the storm events, it's much higher. But it's also high during other points. So I didn't put a line on here because it wouldn't be a very good scale, because we have numbers from 2,000 up
Which
to
year are you on right now?
10,000. So if we just look at this graph here.
Okay, right.
So 200 colonies per mill is the recreation standard. That would be way down here.
Right.
In most sampling events in all locations other than Reed and Riddle Point within the lake, we have high concentrations that are above recreation standards. So swimming in any of those other tributaries would not be recommended.
Advisable.
Yes, I wouldn't advise it. I swim in the lake. I bring my children to swim in the lake. I find no issue with the lake. I, however, would not allow them to swim in the tributaries. That's just my personal point of view on that. So if we look at the different bacteria concentrations on this table, actually gives you all of those values. So in certain points in time, it's actually much lower when we don't have a lot of rainfall, because the rain washes over the land and carries material into the water with it. It also saturates the soil so that when we have a septic system, it doesn't have as much time to feed through the soils and sediments to filter out that bacteria, so that's going to flush much more rapidly. So we get higher concentrations during storm events. So we had 429, which was April, and we had relatively high during that storm event. Then we followed up in May 23rd, and some areas are high and some areas are not as high. So some areas are much lower, but these streams are still high as well as the channel. However, it is really important to note that some of these stream samples that I collected, there was tiny, tiny amounts of water coming in through that stream. The only way to really know for certain how much it's contributing for the whole stream is to know the total volume of water that's actually coming in from the stream. That is really, really low, and it would take a lot more monitoring in order to understand the total volume of water actually coming in, because it's not a lot.
High concentration, but not a lot.
High concentration, but not a lot of water. So it takes, I can barely get my 1 liter bottle down into the actual water to get enough water to get a sample. So then we have in June, concentrations in most locations are much lower other than in the Knob Creek area. Those were higher during that event. And then in August, most locations are below what I would consider safe to recreate, even within the Chitwood areas are all low as well. So in August, we have less rain coming in, so we're going to have less bacteria issues in general because there's not as much water coming into the system. Okay, so that's nice that we do have lower concentrations during that time. In the past, if we look over the course of many years, we didn't always see this. So that's something I would like to do, is pull all the bacteria results from many years rather than just isolating on this 1 year and see, are we getting better, or are we getting worse as a whole? And that's something that we'll look to do. And then obviously the decreases, and we had 524, which was before 2018. Most locations were still relatively high, even though within some of those areas. And then in June, with our storm event being very high. Okay. So those are our bacteria. Then if we go in and we look at our trophic status of the lake. So trophic status puts the lake into a classification of productivity. How productive is the ecosystem as a whole? Eutrophic being highly productive. Lake Lemon is a highly productive system, as are most lakes in the state. So many classify as eutrophic, and Lake Lemon is not an exception, but rather consistent with many. So we have, each year we can classify the lake based on the Secchi depth transparency, so that's how clear is the water. We can also classify based on the chlorophyll A concentration, and we can base our trophic classification on the total phosphorus concentrations in the water. So we have each one of those broken down in the report so you can look at them. We have an average line as well as what is considered eutrophic, and in all circumstances we fall in the eutrophic. Chlorophyll not all year long, for only parts of the year, likely because a lot of the impact in water clarity as well as the phosphorus in the lake comes from the sediment coming into the lake. So we tend to have, for the others, you get a higher trophic classification of being more eutrophic all year long because we tend to have more phosphorus and more less transparency. However, when we look at the actual plant pigment that it's producing, the actual phytoplankton, we don't see that eutrophic classification till later in the summer because we have more algae growing in the late summer, which is very common, and which alludes to why we have the next section, which is sampling of an overflow pond. So along South Shore Drive, there are the overflow ponds there that drive along the causeway, and you can see them. In 2016, one of them was very rust-colored. So we began collecting samples there. The rust color was attributed to Sclerodermopsis, which is a specific type of blue-green algae that has been found as early as 2005 in the lake. It's been increasing in its frequency of appearance in that overflow pond. Or it bloomed 1 year, which is a rapid increase in the population. We weren't monitoring it before that, but we noticed this odd color, so we were asked to come and sample. We've now put that into our regular sampling schedule to sample that pond. So, and also monitoring it to see if we see those colors. The concern is that specific blue-green algae produces algotoxins, which can be harmful to human health as well as animals. So we're wanting to monitor for blooms of that and keep an eye on it, because if we see high concentrations in that pond, it is recommended that people not be recreating in that pond. Because there are a lot of anglers. I saw somebody out there fishing this morning as I drove by. So there are people often there. So in August last year, we did again see high concentrations, high numbers of Cylindrospermopsis in that pond, not this summer as of yet. So we monitored in May, and we didn't see those high concentrations of that blue-green algae there yet. And also the lake concentrations do not match those of the overflow pond. So we don't see it in the lake. It's only isolated to that pond.
Which overflow pond are you talking
Yeah.
The one,
Long causeway.
the long causeway,
Okay,
the
that's what I
long
thought.
causeway pond. However, that similar color, the similar rust color was seen in the other
about?
ponds.
The trestle is?
Yes, we also saw that same similar rust color in the other overflow ponds. We only sampled in the one though. And I continue to sample it periodically, and if I see anything, I will sample again. So,
Both ponds, you'll sample again, is what you're saying?
I've only sampled the one so
The
far,
long
but if
causeway, yeah.
we can add more if needed, if that becomes an area of concern. So basically the lake is similar to what it has been. I'd like to look into the bacteria concentrations historically some more and see if this is an improvement from what we've seen in the past, or if it's getting worse.
I think that would help us all. That was my question going through it was, you know, I see these every year, but.
What does it look like in the long
Yeah.
term? Yes. So I'm working on pulling together a better data structure. So this was handed to me in years of time lag in the way that you report something changes over time, and I'm working to pull it into one very unified system so that I can better improve our ability to give you long-term trends
Excellent.
beyond the total phosphorus and SECI and chlorophyll, because those are very easy. We have that, as you see, we have the long-term trend. That's doing good. It's staying very much the same, and that's what we want it to do. We don't want it to get worse, but I'd like to see what the bacteria looks like as well.
Do you know of other like lakes, like Lake Leonard reservoirs in Indiana, do they have a lot of rules regarding, you know, septic and leaves and this and that? I mean, in a way, these results are gonna kind of tie in with whatever this sedimentation project does down the road, because I see that as part of the cause, but, you know, I guess I'd be interested, maybe not now, but knowing, what are the best practices? What do other people do, and how can we help keep this
No, I
from
think that.
going to the lake?
Yes, I think that would be great. I haven't looked as much into the management aspects of what other people are doing, but I know there are groups that are, and I think that would be easy information to come by, especially being involved with the Lakes Management Society.
That would be helpful.
Pull some of that information.
And I would suspect in looking at the best management practice, we also need to identify who has the regulatory authority over it. I would guess in
Sure.
many cases, not us.
Right.
Right.
But
But
taking
no,
it to
it's
the right
important to know
people,
because we need to
taking
know
it
who
to
to
the
talk
right
to.
people.
Correct.
Yeah, as far as mandate, I think it lies within the health department of the other, the county health department.
I think a lot of what people do, rather than mandating any one specific practice, is advertising what you can do as an individual to help your
Sure.
lake. Like,
Yeah.
let's make this a group effort rather than pinpointing anybody as you're the problem. Let's all do our part to make it safe and marketing that such that it looks like, let's make it safe for ourselves and for our children, and pinpointing that often kind of helps in making it a group effort of how everyone.
We'll take questions when she's finished, Gail.
It has to do with the Chitwood.
Unless you want to do it right now. I don't know how.
Okay, so I have a house on Chitwood, and I have a lot of rental houses at the Rock River Lake. And so we very painstakingly put in a decent septic because we had land. And I have helped install and climate-time septics. I'm a septic expert because every time I buy a house, I put in a septic, and I bought like over 15 houses. I put in like 8 septic. So I was working with the company to get the right, and I worked a lot with the health department. I looked around at houses on Chitwood. There are ones that have no yard, no place for a septic field. And the health departments told me that probably most of these houses along here, could not replace any septic, and probably their septics have failed. And I said, well, what can you do about it? He goes, well, we can condemn them, but they're not going to. I know they've condemned other places in Brown County. So I know for a fact that I have neighbors on Chitwood that have maybe not a real septic or no septic field, and that's part of the problem. And he was saying, well, if we condemn these people, then they don't have a house because they couldn't do anything with it. So that's part of the problem with Chitwood, is there's no place to put septic. There's several houses you can walk down there and see that have no place where there'd be a septic field.
I would add to that there are places all around the lake where it's
Okay.
tight. Our septic system was blown up when we got ready to buy our house and going right into the lake, so that had
Yeah.
to change. And unless that house would have been put up on the market, that wouldn't have been rectified, so.
Yeah, they
it's a-
identified the Chitwood.
It
that's
just
why
may
we're
show up a
saying
little
Right.
more there, but anyway.
I can attest to this, that's the point I want to make. This is not isolated to that one area of the lake. Knob Creek across the lake has concentrations just as high. And previously, we were sampling the incorrect Knob Creek, and I, through some investigation and walking around, located where the correct location of where that should be sampled, and what is actually coming in from that, because the previous, which was over by the marina, was actually fed from up the street, which was mostly road drainage rather than the neighborhoods across the road. Bear Creek is just as high. Bean Blossom is also high. So it's not isolated to any one location. It's a problem across the entire county, and I know that there's some work within the county. So I think that it's about how, hopefully educating people and helping them do better rather than.
It's in the paper all the time. I mean, Brown County's struggling with it, so I'm sure you read that.
Other questions?
I entertain any other questions from the board first, and then.
I recall there was a student that was going to be working on a response plan for the LG bloom. Has there been progress on that?
I would leave that to Adam to update, because
I met last month with myself, Melissa Clark, and Mohammed on that, and we were expecting that this summertime. So probably within the next 2 months or so. And that's actually going to be kind of a notice and response plan. So, if we start to, we'll send out to the public and kind of get a community monitoring system. If we start to notice these changes, such as the rust collar or the presence of algae or scum, they can notify us. It's kind of a phone tree, and they'll actually have recommendations as far as increased sampling for the area, actually getting some of our own equipment here in the office so we can sample on a flash to see what type of algae is present there and potentially toxin. So we'll be looking for that response plan here in the next couple of months. It's a grad student at IU that's doing that for us.
Any other board questions?
Yes. Back to Chitwood. I represent the folks from Chitwood, and the one sampling that you took that was significant was across the road, which is prior to even getting into the Chitwood area. So I just want to make that clear, that it's not the significant area that you're talking about is across the road, even before it gets into the weir that's been built.
Yes, so post that, so this is where, without having an actual volume of water that's coming in, what I would expect is a dilution factor by the time you get to the end. And we don't see a dilution factor, we see an increase. So that attests to, in my opinion, at this point, the best educated opinion I can give you is it's a combination of two problems. That stream is definitely contributing bacteria.
But again, you took the sample across the road.
Did take it across the road.
Okay.
I take them across the road and
So
I
you
take
did
them
not
within.
take the sample in the stream, and then you took a second sample as the water comes out of all 3 or 4.5 channels before it gets into the little Africa channel.
Yes, I
Okay.
take them in both.
Just wanted to make that clear.
Yes,
But you took both. You
I
took-
take both.
Yes, but if you look at table
in
4,
and then out.
you look at table 4, the most
So you look
significant area of bacteria is before the stream.
It is before the stream, but I also comment the volume of water. Right now, we have not been, it was not in the sampling plan to monitor the flow of water coming in from the stream.
And we need to do a better job now that these areas are gonna be dredged to come back and take multiple samples so that we have not, maybe a better non-skewed report.
The flow of water coming in from that channel is very low compared to the volume of water in the channels. So it cannot, in my opinion, it cannot be the only contributing factor. I do think sediment is also a problem. So it's also important to note that bacteria can come from other sources besides just septics and besides just animals, and it can also grow within sediment. So I think the dredging will actually help, but the dredging is also going to increase the volume, so it's going to increase dilution.
Okay.
So that's the same thing I'm saying from the stream should be being diluted by the water. So if I take a little bit of salt and I put it in this bottle, or I have a whole bucket of salt or water and I put the same amount of salt in it, the whole concentration is going to be a lot smaller in that bucket. So I would expect to have less salt at the end in the bucket than I do in this little bottle if I put the same amount in them, right? So when you dilute the bacteria in all that water, you expect to see less bacteria at the end. We have just as much, if not more, at the end.
Right.
So to clarify, what you're saying is, if there was not input from the septic systems, that high concentration would then end up being low.
It would end up being lower at
But
the end.
it's not,
It's not.
and so that indicates that there is input
Yes.
from the local septic systems, and it's a combination of the
It's a
two.
combination. It's not
And you did
isolated.
sample both places, so you can scientifically say, yeah, these, it's from both.
I would expect it to be from both.
Any questions from our public?
Would the dredging of those stir up stuff that has been there?
I can't comment to whether or not that would. I don't think so, but I haven't read into whether dredging of bottom sediments. I don't think there's more E. coli living in the bottom under that, but I don't have a
Just for
specific
stirring
answer.
up from that?
I think it could unlock nutrients that are stored into the soil, but the bacteria pretty much
The
be eaten up by
nutrients, the bacteria. Yeah. Yes.
My name's Carl Mills. I've been out here for a minute or two since about 85 or just before. And I've heard many of these discussions in that time frame, okay? I think there are two things that would be very important to bring to light here. You probably are fairly new at this. I mean, as far as this lake, you don't have my history, so.
95.
What I would like to say is this: everybody seems to be hung up on septic systems and such in particular areas of the lake, okay? Nobody has a monopoly on contributing to the problem, okay? The first damn thing I had to do just about when I moved into my house and decided to raise a family is figure out that the septic system was failing, buy a lot across the street, or under the road and put a mound system over there, because even on my property, there wasn't sufficient room to do what was necessary, okay, with the technology that I had. That's changed a lot. That was, 20 years ago, 25, something like that, okay? But all the way around the lake, there's contributing factors. Failing septics, gray lines, agriculture, everything under the sun. So pointing fingers at one area or another, sure, where there's less water flow at that end of the lake, you're gonna see more of everything. That's where it comes into the lake, okay? Great, by the time you get out here, it's pretty darn diluted, okay? The other thing that I thought was very important to point out is every time there's a high water event of any kind, there's a tremendous spike in everything all over the lake, okay? We've just flushed Brown County. The watershed goes all the way to Bean Blossom and past, okay? We've just flushed everything into the lake, okay? I seem to remember from your reports, Adam, and stuff like this, and other people who have done studies, is that that's pretty darn normal for any lake, and that with this lake, it does a remarkably good job of nature taking care of what it's supposed to do. And so by the time that high flow event has passed, and a couple days has passed, when we would do new samplings out in the main body of the lake, the level of every bacteria that you're talking about was boom, right back down in some really groovy numbers, okay? And so, you know, I think that's pretty normal. I've not been to these meetings in a long time, but yeah, I mean, I hear a lot of talk about these spikes. I don't know what you'd ever do to change that.
Yeah, it definitely spikes during
And the fact that it drops back down very quickly, I
What
don't
I
know how
don't have
much we're
is
counting,
follow-up
like-
sampling within the lake, because I'm not contracted to come out to sample.
And
post this
I didn't
one
want to go
event.
into a
It's
big
okay.
debate on anything.
No,
I just wanted-
Thank you.
Our weekly
All valid
samples,
comments.
our weekly samples of the beach average between 4 and 10 colony forming units. So just showing what the
Well,
levels
so
are.
those are really good numbers, aren't they, Adam? I don't know.
Yeah, that's really, that's
Great.
orders of magnitude lower than what we're counting in some of the tributaries. And the lake
And
does a
that's
good job. We
every
turn
day.
over our entire volume of water about 5 times per year. So I would say that dilution is a solution to pollution. But we do need to focus on some of the areas that we can't control and have an impact on. And we do know they're there, and they have historically not been addressed.
And I'm not diminishing any of that.
Thanks for
It's
your
just
comments.
everybody's contributing.
Thanks for your comments, and I think you've done a good job of not pointing fingers. I mean, you have to face reality on these things, and as I said, I've had the same problem, and I'm not any, I'm across the way from what you're talking about. You've done a good job with that, so.
Are there any other things that you need addressed?
I don't think so this time.
Okay.
Thank you,
I will try
Sarah.
to bring in some of those long-term
Thanks.
and follow up on that response plan and update this and then send this back.
We'll look forward to hearing back from you. We appreciate your time, and unless you want to stay for lunch, you are excused.
I would
Grab it to go.
absolutely
You may
might be ready.
see if it's ready.
Take it
And
out.
you
I would
might- you
actually
might-
stay because I'm actually very interested because I live out here, so that's what allows me to grab lots of samples. 'Cause I've got volunteer spectrum.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. Okay, now we're going to shift back. The next item, or what would be the treasurer's report. And for those of you who haven't been to meetings in the last year and a half, we have been traditionally now changed over to public comment being held till the end of the meeting. And we're going to do that today. We've been allowing, like just then, some limited questioning, and it's gone very well. But in order to keep meetings moving quickly, we've got to do it this way. So we're going to have the treasurer's report and the budget proposal, but I'm going to ask you to wait until the end to ask your questions. Take notes if you need to, and we'll do that in public comment. Bear in mind that this is the first look at this that the board has had all together. We're not allowed by law to sit down behind closed doors and meet over a budget. We have about 5 things we can have executive session meetings without the public, and this isn't one of them. So this is the first chance the board will have to kind of chew on this and review it together. So let us do our job, and then we will be glad to take your brief questions at the end. Michael?
Thank you. May financials, $57,408 in income, $37,993 in expenses, with a net of $19,414. Adam sent the second part of the board packet yesterday with explanations on the check register, and if we don't have any questions on the May financials, I'll accept a motion to approve.
I had one question.
Yes, ma'am.
Do we have, as a conservancy district, a reserve policy? I know we've got this cumulative maintenance fund. I'm looking at the balance sheet, basically, and $474,000 in checking and savings, and then what we have accumulated in terms of retained earnings. It might be something we want to talk about, like what we think we need for like a reserve policy or something.
The historical policy was $5,000 a year that we added to the cumulative maintenance. So it's not just kind of a basic policy, but every year we had 5,000.
So we need a budget, so we've at least got 5,000 in income, so we can put it in there.
Yes, yeah, we do.
And then the only other thing that I would comment on for us to think about in the future is trying to capture, because we have a lot of equipment now, particularly the dredging equipment, so the depreciation expense, to kind of consider, that as a fact that's happening.
Yes, it sure is.
All right. is that your list, Debbie? Okay. I would make the motion, Mike, to approve the financials.
Okay. Motion's been made and seconded. Is there any discussion? All in favor to approve the report of claims for May, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, Madam Chair, if I may present to the board the introduction of the 2019 proposed budget, and since we have a full room, I figured I'd get up so I can make myself heard. This is the first read of the 2019 proposed budget, as presented by the Finance Committee, which consists of myself, the chair, and the vice chair, Mary Jane Brown. So the board understands that we're challenged with a lot of things going on with our lake, and I think the board did a good job with Adam's help to create the lake limit facts of June of 2018. So we're tasked with trying to come up with some revenues to complete these tasks that the SPC will talk about here when I get finished. So what the committee has come up with, and this is just a first read explanation that I've had just since I sat down here today. Some other proposals to go into this first page of the revenue. Rather than put the bond loan proceeds in there at $1 million, that maybe we would just put the consultant proceeds in there. But I'm going to read it as it is and leave the clarification for later. So the most significant impact on the revenue for 2019 would be if we were to borrow $1 million, the payback of that for the entire year is $67,000. So we put that in there as a raise in taxes of about 26.8%. And that brought Brown County property tax revenue from $65,000 to $82,420, and Monroe County property tax income from $185,000 to $234,580. The other significant increase then, of course, would be the sediment removal bond loan proceeds for $1 million. I'm going to move to the next page if the board doesn't have any questions on revenues. Wages, most significant increase there was, and there's a lot of discussion, people in Adam's position typically make at the minimum of $62,000. We've done some research on that. And so with the change in his insurance policy, the committee has recommended that we pay him $59,800 for 2019. That's the most significant increase in the wages portion. Other than everything else down at the bottom, the dredger, we gave the dredger an increase from 2018, and some minor increases across the board for the total wages to be $217,025, which is a decrease from last year, or this year, I should say. Supplies. Supplies, it went down $500, as you can see at the bottom of the page. Really, Adam's done a good job of keeping the supply area in a pretty good constant. Move on to services and charges. Nate Anderson does our grass mowing, and he's kept that at $10,560. I think if we tried to bid that out, we would pay a considerable amount more for that. We put the $1 million in 6330 consulting engineers, and that is not what we would be paying engineers. That's just where we put the money, because the engineers would then direct us or direct the SPC and approved by the board where we would start with our impact. Okay, so we're not paying the engineers $1 million. We're just putting that money in the engineer category. And the committee agreed with that.
And our total contract with them is how much? Shrewsbury, is that what you're talking about?
Shrewsbury.
Current contract is 50,000.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
But we don't really know what it'll be for next year.
I don't think so.
I don't think we do.
Okay,
Right.
thank you, Mary Jane.
Not yet.
Okay,
But we can't, our feeling was we can't walk into 2019 and not have a budget for the work that we believe will get done next year. I've got some comments, but maybe I'll wait till you get through it.
Let's get through the whole thing.
okay, thank you. All right. I was going to look and see where the other significant increase, really no other significant increase in that area when it comes to transportation, printing, insurance, and utility service. It stayed the same, $10,050. All right. Services and charges, this has been something that we all have been trying to get accomplished, and that's we added $10,000 to our buildings and grounds for our park. And that's for ADA compliance to the bathhouse, et cetera, okay? And that brought that total, well, I don't have the total here, but I know it's significant. It's a significant difference. Thank you. Moving on to other services and charges, we did add a 6650, which is pre-sediment management plan, and that's just to have some money in there, for the SPC and for what we decide that we're going to do, either by using our own equipment or, outside help. So that is 6650. Do you have a current?
And so what's that supposed to represent? What we're going to have to pay who?
That's just any prep work for a pre-sediment management plan to clear out sediment basins or to do some weed control or whatever.
Committee recommended that just so we have some monies in case we need to do some prep work once again in the plan, whether it be in laying riprap down in certain areas and some stabilization. But that way, if we do need to do prep work, moving in the plan, we could have a little bit additional money aside from our dredging fund for such things as either stone, moving dirt, staff. Likelihood is we'll probably not need that, but it gives us a little bit more of a buffer for what we can accomplish in preparation for the sediment management plan initiatives.
Which budget line is that? I'm not following.
6650?
Oh, okay.
Thank you. You're welcome. Any other comments on 6650? Again, everything else. Now, we do have a debt service bond repayment in there. Again, this is the first read, so that would be the cost of the entire year to borrow $3 million at approximately 3%.
1 million.
1 million.
I'm sorry, $1 million. Thank you, $1 million at 3%.
And I think it's important to point out, though, that we don't know if it's going to be $1 million. This was just a placeholder, and I think that's what, at least has confused some of the people in my district anyway.
I agree, absolutely. So we have a starting place, and hopefully by August we'll have an ending place. So that's it as far as services and charges. And then we'll go to the last page. There were no changes to the machinery and equipment, and there were no capital outlays.
So you don't think there's anything we have to do around here from a capital standpoint?
No, not as far as equipment purchase that or what we can now.
I've never seen that column 0. in all
Yeah, it
these
kind of
years.
bothers me seeing it 0. I don't know how
It is
realistic that
it
is.
is 0 last year.
Like, no capital expenditures.
As far as equipment purchases, yeah, we're not. And as we look into, once we get further along in the project, if we decide that we need to, perhaps purchase another dump truck, which will be coming up sooner than later in the next few years, then we'll put that in there. Potentially, we could use monies that we bring in for the project to utilize equipment, buy it, use it afterwards.
Madam Chair, that includes the first read of the 2018.
I have a question.
Thank you.
So backing up a little bit, you said the dredger cost actually went down. The dredger cost decreased from last this year?
I think we've got, like, how much do we have in the budget for overall dredging? I was kind of trying to add it up.
About $100,000.
Yeah,
It's about $100,000.
Okay,
So.
well, I was just wondering why it went down.
100, 110.
Give me your line item that you're looking
I
at.
think it might have even been under salary. Maybe it was for the operator.
No, that went up. That actually, yeah. He got a raise. He got a 50 cent an hour raise, I
No, they
believe.
do a 50-cent raise. We actually budgeted for the supplies part of the dredging did go down because they budgeted for the replacement of cylinders on the dump truck and the excavator, which has been, those have been purchased and added on. That was pretty significant, so we were able to bring that down, close to $10,000, I believe.
Oh, okay.
Any other questions from the board for Michael?
Well, I don't have a question, but I have a comment probably. So I have talked to Adam and kind of recommended that I think that we need to have a realistic timeline because we don't know what we're gonna do. We don't have our Shrewsbury report until the middle of July. The problem is we're hemmed in with budgeting dates with the Department of State,
Local
government finance. So we're kind of in a catch-22. I wouldn't want everybody to think that it's only gonna cost $1 million and that we've made a decision because there's a lot that goes into issuing bonds. I think we need to come up with a timeline realistically of what we really will be doing in 19, which is probably bidding out construction costs, trying to do due diligence, get the bonds and things like that. And what we need to have in this budget are really the expenses related to getting to our solution before we all decide what our solution is. And that would be my suggestion, that putting that million and these, because, I mean, that was just a swag too. Who knows if that 67,000 is really, gonna be a good number. So that would be my suggestion that we look at, and we're not gonna vote on anything today.
No, this
But I
is,
think we need to take this into consideration.
The timeline is set by the state. So
Right.
August is our timeline. And as I said, when I first started speaking, we don't know whether it's going to be $1 million or
So how did we
whatever.
come up with the 28.6% increase in tax?
That'll pay the interest on the bond.
If we get one for that.
They'll pay the interest and the principal.
So that may not be all that's needed, but this would be, and again, you and I talked about the timing of this. If we get this in August, this would affect everybody's taxes for March of 19
For
or November
spring
of
and fall
19.
settlements in 19 would be active, yeah. And we don't know the cost yet. With Shrewsbury right now, at the end of this report, we're looking at all the different options that we have. We're actually gonna break them down individually into almost an all-a-carte type thing. There's no way we're gonna be able to go on and do everything that we wanna do, including dredging, wetland enhancement, streams. It's just not gonna be fiscally viable. So what we're gonna be doing based on this is we're gonna look at where do we wanna start at? What do we feel like needs to be the absolute initial start of the project, which I feel is going to be the sediment reduction and loading on the options that we're looking at. We've shown some of the maps on the big projectors. At the other meetings, they're actually going to be creating siltation and sediment catchment basins in Bean Blossom Creek, actually up the creek, kind of right after Aqua Isle and a couple parcels of land. We're looking at that. We're looking also opening up the old creek channels and utilizing the existing wetlands that we have for sediment capture and filtration of sediment. A lot of that's going to include wetland basins that are in the wooded areas now that have been created, and we're going to focus and open up those areas so sediment at high flows can go into these wetland areas, and we're going to phrase it as enhancement of the wetland to transition it from just spattered off and wilderness to more of a functional wetland. So honestly, that's probably where we need to start from a fiscal standpoint, and then also from a gains and benefits standpoint. Because if we go in to start tackling the dredging, well, then we're slapping all the sediment coming in. So realistically, I feel like we need to focus on the sediment reduction and stabilization portions of it. That way it buys us time and it slows down the amount of sediment coming in. And when we do not have the cost factors for that. So we'll know that kind of once we decide what we want to start, what we want to bite off and shoot in the initial stage of the project. It's going to be a very long-term project. And realistically, once we decide what we want to do in next year's budget, we need to have the money to bring those small phases up to construction level documents to bid out. And that will probably not happen until, summer to fall time next year, including permitting time or permits and that.
All right.
No,
Pam, can I make one other comment? Just for the record, I also think that we need to go back to the city of Bloomington. We get down the road and look at the fact that we're in the middle of this lease and that we've got an option to renew it, or they would give us an option to purchase it at the end of the lease. I think we need to go to them, as any leaseholders do, and say, you know, we're about to put $1 million, $2 million, whatever the number is, into the lake. We need to renegotiate this thing and see kind of where we're at. Maybe we need to own it. I don't know. But I'll talk to Ab about that. I think that would be crucial.
This is, you know, that's an interesting point, Debbie, one that I hadn't spent a lot of time thinking about, but one of the things when you embark on a project that is as enormous and costly as this could be, there are so many other factors that come into play, and I think at some point, the board needs to really focus on what those factors are. I don't think that's for the necessarily, you know, the strategic planning committee can make recommendations, but I think the board needs to have that in-depth conversation. So I think what we were trying to do with this draft of the budget was to simply put a placeholder so that we wouldn't, pardon the expression, get caught with our pants down when we need to spend some money next year.
Well,
And everything has moved pretty quickly for what the, you know, when I think of the Conservancy, you know, in the last few years since I've been on the board, this has moved pretty quickly, and so not everything is lining up as neatly as we like. The financial plan needs to follow, you know, needs to be in sync with the actual plan for the work. And we've kind of been trying to go down a dual path, which makes it difficult. But I think I would encourage that the whole board needs to have some discussion about who we are and what we want to be as a conservancy district.
I believe
And
we can
then
have-
I agree wholeheartedly that at some point, and we knew this, Adam has constant contact, and unintended, with the people at the CBU, and all of us in the last year or so have been to, maybe not all of us, but some of us have been to meetings at CBU, so they're aware that we're doing something. But to go back and have that kind of a more serious conversation, we need to know what we want before we do that.
well, and I think the other thing as a board member that I would like to see before our next discussion of the budget is what really has been the history of the tax increases over time, the assessed values, things like that, because there's, you know, if it is a 28% increase, you know, I was telling Adam, we pay an incredible amount of real estate taxes for our property here, and I know our conservancy district fee is a small amount, but I think we need to look at, have we ever raised that fee for any, you know, I think we need to explain that and take a look at it.
Last time was in 2008, and it was a 250% increase.
I think it was higher than that. Is that, do you remember, Mike?
I think it's 360%.
well,
But anyway, I think we need to look at that.
We need to understand the history of where we are, because
It's just like the water quality, you want to see.
we want to see the trending and what the actual impacts have been. So for me, there's a lot more information that I think would be helpful for us to make informed decisions, and certainly I'm glad we're not voting today.
Yeah. And I believe we can actually have sessions for education and strategy.
Yeah.
We can.
Yeah.
I mean, that's would be my.
So that'd be a good time to get the whole board together with that information.
Okay. Move to the manager's report if,
Yeah, you're right, 259.195% in 2008.
2008.
all right.
All right.
Thank you, Mike. Manager's report. Adam?
Large operations, again, the equipment's getting old, the old equipment's continually needed work, but the new equipment has been functioning really well. So far we've removed 2,900 yards from the Chitwood channels this year, and we're currently on the last longest stretch. After that, we'll just be in the really short channels, we can use a small barge for, which will go pretty quick. I'm confident that we'll be able to knock out that entire area this year within the budget and the time frame, which will be very nice. As far as the vegetation control update, on May 31st, we treated 50.6 acres of primarily Eurasian milfoil. There's also some naiad and spatter dock that was in that treatment. We spent $26,630 with a very non-existent springtime. The rain that we had, the lake's been incredibly muddy, so it's a very late bloom of vegetation. And actually this year is probably going to be quite a bit lower financially than we historically have, which will be nice to see a savings there. Generally, we'll do about 3 treatments. We'll do the Eurasian milfoil, we'll do kind of another mixed treatment, and then the lotus. Based on the number of complaints that we had on vegetation, which is incredibly minimal this year, and nice to see. I think we'll be able to wait until we do a lotus and do a final treatment kind of in the late summer to tackle all of that. So vegetation-wise, the late spring and all the rain has actually really helped us out by, well, bringing sediment unfortunately into the lake, which shades out the vegetation. Fireworks donations, we're having the fireworks, as everybody should know, through the communications on Tuesday the 3rd with the rain date of Friday the 6th. So far we've received $4,050. We got more donations there, so we're quickly going to achieve our goal. Last year, I believe we got over $2,000 a day of donations as well, and it was absolutely insane here at the park. I don't know if anybody is here. I think we're actually going to have to cut off into the park at some point. It's pretty chaotic getting everybody out last year. Yeah, it's the new company that we've been using, and they're local around here. So they don't make any, they're not non-for-profit, but they do it not-for-profit. So all the money that we spend goes directly to shells and the show, so they're not taking an overhead at all, which works out very good. So it'll be the same company doing it this year. We'll be shooting from the point again on the 3rd. And then the next thing I just wanted was Indiana Lakes Management Society. I'm on with Sarah and a few of the lake professionals around the state, actually quite a few. We're looking at hosting a summer educational series out here for lake and pond management, wetlands and vegetation education, and really trying to just get, for the board members and for the public, to get a better grasp on what's actually going on, what it takes to management, and what we can do to affect this stuff. So we're looking at using the shelter using the shelter right here. I know I have to get a waiver, but I guess I kind of like, I don't have specific dates, there's 3 or 4 that we're looking at currently, but I'd like to just get a blanket motion to waive shelter reservation fees for educational services for the public.
Adam, specific to the, with your association, what types of, I mean, are they weekends, are they weekdays, do you know?
We're looking at Saturdays. That way we can get people from the lake out here, and other different people, though they're not working. So we're looking at doing it on Saturdays, so we can try to get as much of the general public and freeholders as we can.
So would you do it, what time of day? Would it be mornings?
We could talk, probably similar to this, maybe around 10 o'clock or so, give people time to wake up, and however we're not taking their whole day. Probably would be 2-hour sessions, I would assume.
So they wouldn't be like prime time for social events that other people might
No, hopefully we
serve
can
the shelter house.
get you in, get you learned, and get you out. So.
On the days that we have it, would there be opportunities for the public to rent like after?
Like, when does this place usually rent? Like, and how often?
Usually, well, the rental generally goes from 8 to 8, so it's the entire beach day. And we've averaged, this is actually one of our highest years for rental, and we are averaging about 5 to 6 rentals per month. So I guess there would be the opportunity, and that's something we could look at. And we've done that before where people have come in, and actually after a board meeting last summer, and they agreed that they could use it from noon until then at night. So we could potentially do that.
I mean, so I'm kind of uncomfortable giving a complete blanket for any education
Right.
thing because that's very broad, but I don't have any objection for ILMA.
Yeah, just, I guess not for all education.
IMLS. Doing it for that, and then also on those dates, making the shelter available for the public after the meeting. Obviously disclosing that it's not a full day rental, that one, but if they're comfortable with that.
Yeah, so I'm just asking for Elms and let's say two reservations potentially for the education.
So it'll be just 2.
Yeah, just 2. And it would be Elms, it wouldn't be just general education via the Indian Lakes Management Society.
And open to public, say, after.
Yeah, we can open it to public after for rental and the
Is that
end of the day.
You want to make that motion?
I would make that motion.
Okay, Michael has
I'll
made the
second.
motion. Moved and seconded, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Adam, is that the end of your report? Yes.
All right, that's the end of my report.
All right, that takes us to our last big piece today, and that is the Strategic Planning Committee update with Mary Jane.
Okay, thank you. We met last Friday, the 15th, and we had an update from a meeting that actually occurred on May 24th, which was the date of the last board meeting that Malcolm, Ann, and I attended with Shrewsbury to talk about grant money, different kinds of funding options, and those kinds of things. And I mentioned this very briefly at the last board meeting, but I wanted to say it in a little bit more detail here. Shrewsbury had told us that much of the available grant money that we would have been able to use for Lake Lemon was used up largely used up in a number of studies that were done of Lake Lemon in the 1970s and 80s. And when I asked what the results of those studies were, it was pretty much nothing. That was in that time frame before the Conservancy was formed, so we really don't know much. Bottom line is, Shrewsbury said we're gonna have to get more creative about looking at grant opportunities, and they've got some people that are gonna work on this and get back to us. So they're investigating kind of what they characterized as out-of-the-box solutions to help with funding. And they encouraged us, they were very excited, I think, as excited as consultants get. They were very excited about the fact that we were putting the Lake Lemon Enhancement Fund with the foundations in Monroe County and Graham County, and encouraged us to continue our search for possible large donors. And so we are, and that'll kind of segue into, we are working on those items, and then in addition to looking at large donors, we're planning a fundraiser in September 15th to be exact, that will be a home boat tour with wine tasting and live music, silent auction, those kinds of events. And so we're Kathy McClure and Ann are doing the lion's share of the work. I just kind of follow along behind. But we've got some homeowners on the lake who graciously have offered to let us use their homes for these boat tours. And we're hoping that we'll raise a goodly sum of money out of that. Although I think we all recognize that we can use those kinds of events to raise smaller amounts of money and raise awareness about the needs of the lake. We need to continue to look hard at large donors. What else am I supposed to say on this part? We're going to have a two-part strategic planning committee. Why don't I just do communications, and then Adam can go do the lake health piece. We had a lot of good comments from the first newsletter in June, and we should have another one ready to publish at the end of July, and that'll be coming in draft form, I think, in the next week to you, Pam, so that we can finalize the content. But at any rate, we struggled with the feedback that you guys gave us that the first one was too long, and it is an embarrassment of riches to have so much news. You have to pick and choose. But this next one will be a little bit shorter, but we've got a lot to say right now, so it won't be a lot shorter. And then we talked about the picnic, which I won't bore you with because you're going to enjoy it in a few minutes. And that's my portion of the report. I asked Adam to do the Lake Health Task Group update. So take it away.
Wait, I'm sorry, there's a public meeting discussion piece, is that what you want to?
Sorry, yes, we are planning to have another large public meeting like we did a year ago in May. And we thought that would happen maybe at the end of August. But since we are somewhat delayed with the report, getting the report from Shrewsbury and getting, all of that information together, we're thinking that meeting will probably take place at the end of September or the first part of October.
Do we have a date on the Shrewsbury report? Is there a date that they promised it to us?
Adam?
Mid-July, I believe it was the 13th or 14th, is when we're expecting to have kind of the report that's going to list out all the specific options and have cost estimates along with that.
And I don't want to steal your thunder, Adam, but once we have their report, and we decide which options, we have to have some more conversation with the Army Corps of Engineers and IDAM and the City of Bloomington Utilities before we actually are going to have a plan.
Yeah, there'll be a lot of permitting. Maybe not a whole lot, we'll see.
Thank you. So back to Adam and the Lake Health Task update as a subset of the.
I guess since we have a lot of people that aren't at the general meetings, so the first thing I kind of want to get across with the sediment management plan that we're doing now is it's not just going to be another dredging project where we're focusing on providing access to the lake. Since we started our project and I guess started taking 2006, bought the equipment in 08, we've used all of our effort and monies and we focused on just strictly access to individuals on the lake. We've been ignoring the problem at hand, which is the sediment coming into the bay and taking away the volume and area that's utilized by the entire public. So the goal, what we're looking at to do with this is, it's multifold. The first thing that we're looking at doing is reducing the amount of sediment that's actually entering the lake proper. Secondly, would be to increase the efficiency of our efforts to control and remove that sediment. And then thirdly would be gaining back some ground. I don't think it's going to be feasible to gain back the forested areas that are there, but when we're looking at between Reed Point and Point Eidolon, we got an average of 3 foot water. It's becoming very dangerous, and we'll need to act soon. And the fact is, it's going to take money to get there, more than what we have right now. So whether we do the million this year or a different year, it's going to be on that order of magnitude, and it is going to have to happen if we are going to continue to save that lake. So with Shrewsbury, the report that we're working on now is we're breaking down all these potential options. Sure, do we want the Cadillac and want to do all of this? Yeah, but financially that would be astronomical. So some of the things that we're looking at is breaking down as the first step. We want to trap as much sediment as we can as far east before it enters the lake. So in the plans and in the designs, which we'll potentially decide on in construction, we're looking at firstly creating some sediment catchment basins just west of Aqua Isle, where the stream kind of takes 2 90-degree turns, and there's perfect forests there. There's areas there that are not wetlands, and now we've talked with Army Corps of Engineers and would be able to get permitting to create large 5+ acre on the north side, even larger on the south side, sediment catchment basins, where high flows of sediment-laden water will be able to come into these basins, settle out, and then we can maintain those on a multi-year basis. And we'd like those to be accessible from the road so we can get there and maintain those. As we move west, what we're looking at doing is opening up the old creek and stream channels that we have. We already have a huge delta there, and we have massive amounts of wetlands, so we need to make that work for us. It's going to be the most efficient, and it's going to save us the most money. So what we're looking at doing is opening up the old creek pathways to provide more filtration, slow the flow of sediment-laden water, and then trap it into the wetlands that we already have. There's quite a few wetlands that now are kind of between the forested areas that are just lotus and spatter dock. They're very kind of low-level wetlands. And ultimately what we would like to do, as we're opening up these creek channels, put some water diversions. And so at high flows, it's going to push the sediment-laden water into areas where it can settle out and be filtered again. And as we're talking to Army Corps of Engineers, what we're doing in this case is we're actually enhancing the quality and functionality of the wetlands from what's called just an emergent wetland, promoting the transition to scrub, and then forested wetlands, which provide the most functionality as far as catchment, filtration for nutrients and bacteria. So what we're looking at doing is enhancing the wetlands that we currently have and having them work for us. As we move closer into the lake, we're looking again at doing some diversions and utilizing the lotus fields and areas that we already have as catchment areas. So the name of the game is try to reduce the amount of sediment that's coming in and increase the efficiency. So there is going to have to be a shift in focus at some point from straight access digging to focusing on removing sediment in the large bay. And that's going to have to be taken out over multiple years. It's not going to be a one-year project. So we're looking, I mean, as quotes have been coming in for different dredgers, you're looking at $12 to $15 a cubic yard. And if we're looking, there's over 600,000 to 1 million cubic yards in that bay alone. So it's not going to be able to come in and just tackle that all at once. It's going to have to be spread out and chunked into time. So I think the initial focus is going to be, once we get back the 17 or 18 different items that we're looking at for potentials, we'll have a meeting with the board and with the public to present these to the public and say, all right, how much money are we willing to spend at this amount of time, and how much benefit are we going to get from these different options? And we will have to stagger that out over multiple years of input. But if we don't do nothing, it's becoming incredibly noticeable how much force is coming, how much land is coming, and the amount of loss there. And if we don't shift focus there, we know the fate of what's going to happen. So at this point, we just had a meeting with Shrewsbury. We have maps with our potential options. The July report that we're going to get is going to have these all broken down into individual actions, kind of a la carte, so we can get together as a board and as a public and decide where we want to start and what small parts of the project we want to tackle.
With estimated costs?
With estimated cost, yes.
And do you have a sense, like when you talk about that bay area, you talk about this, like right by Reed Point, instead of Reed Point before you get to?
Yeah, when I was talking about that bay kind of between Reed Point and Point Eidolon, the options that we will include too are going to be digging east of Point Eidolon. But when we get into that, what we're going to find is it's already wetlands. Mitigation is very, very expensive if we actually want to start impacting wetlands that we have. The lowest ratio of impacts is if we destroy an acre, the threshold is 1/10 of an acre, but if we destroy an acre of wetland, we have to create 2 acres of wetland or pay into a fund. There's actually an in lieu fee where if we can't create or mitigate on site, you can pay in at $70,000 plus per acre. So if we destroy an acre of wetland dredge, we're looking at $140,000 to $50,000. So what we're doing as we do this is looking at how can we on the lake mitigate these, and we potentially enhance the wetlands that we have, create some in areas that aren't currently being used for recreation, so we can keep the mitigation to a minimum initially, but then do it at cost where we can mitigate on the lake and provide additional benefit as far as sediment trapping and water quality. So it's a pretty big project, and we are kind of it's a moving path, but it is still kind of the early stages. As of a timeline, realistically, once we decide what we want to do, then we'll have to move into the construction documents and permitting. Army Corps of Engineers stated that all the work that we're looking at doing is permissible or able to obtain a permit for. So we'll have to see kind of, they want us to come to them once we decide the options that we want to use and say, all right, here's our plan, here's what we want to do, and then they want to assess that overall plan for an overarching permit, which would actually work out in our benefit, because then we could stagger out our efforts over many years. And the permits, while they are generally only 4 years, you can reapply for them, kind of like we do for our disposal sites. So if we can't do it all in one big chunk, which will probably have to be staggered out, we can keep the permit going. So as we have our master plan. And what I'd like to mention too, a lot of the stuff that we're looking at doing was in the initial district plan from '92, where they're actually looking at that point about building the islands of our own sediment off of Alaska in that bay, and creating sediment ponds, increasing the flow and sinuosity or the curviness of the creek coming in to slow the flow and help sediment drop out. So there's already some of these initial plans in there, but instead we kind of detoured and been focusing just strictly on access. So this is kind of transitioning that thought to usability for the entire lake and freeholders, kind of getting away from focusing just on that and actually using some of the initial plans that we had there that we know we were going to have to tackle.
All right.
So that's kind of the update.
Thanks, Adam. The next piece of our agenda is not going to happen. We were going to honor Sue Miller today. She left the board after her term ended, and we now have Debbie Ladyman, which we're very happy about. Sue is in Florida, so she'll be here in July, and we will recognize her then. Laura, on a side note, Mary Jane and I plan to come over, if it's all right, to honor John, because we know it's hard for him to get to these summer meetings, and we've waited a whole nother year. So we'll get that done in the very near future. And
We'll bring in cocktails.
there you go. Okay, public comment. It's now, I'm going to make a note, it's 11:30. I don't think he's burning our lunch. Hang on one second. We're going to have some rules about this. If you need a microphone, there's a switch on the back of that box you can turn on. I don't know if anybody does. I'd like you to come where the gentleman in red is. Stand if you have a comment and introduce yourself, and keep it brief, 1 to 2 minutes. Thank you.
Okay,
It's like
I would
you're
like
first.
to make 2 very brief comments on the tax situation. We're embarking on some big planning and some big projects. I don't know how many of you were on the board in 2007, 8, that whole range when similar things were being discussed, but a gentleman that was on the board then pointed out that part of the reason that percentage was so high on the increase in everything is because it had been a very long time before that nothing had been put into the budget for planning for these big events that were going on. So it had to be a real big thing right then, and his advice was to not get in that situation again if possible, okay? The other thing I would like to point out is when you look at the piece of paper, everybody gets hung up on percentages, blah, 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 my taxes are high, so are mine. When you look at the paper right there that you guys picked up off the table, and you look at how much you'd be paying in if you had $1 million worth of property, it's a few $100s, okay? You spend more than that at Starbucks or on soda pop or something else, okay? So everybody goes, whoa, this big increase, okay? Let's get it in perspective. Is it, if you own $1 million property, is it worth a couple $100 a year to keep the lake going? And that's all.
Thank you very much. Anybody else, please come to the center if you'd like to speak. Take a turn. And I would like it, I'd like to hear some balance to this. If you want to speak with a change to what he said or in opposition to it, that would be good.
So one of the things I want to say that just in talking about deceiving numbers is, even though the percentage has been the same, it's been a big increase because my property taxes go up, and every time my property taxes go up, even though I'm only paying 2%, that goes up. So it's been increasing every year, even though the percentage isn't increasing. So there's a property, I don't know if the people that own are here, and I apologize for talking about you if you are here. It was assessed about $100,000 a year ago. The amount of money that's been put into it is over $2 million. So now we have a property that was $100,000 and it's now $2 million, as we've seen a lot of these places in the lake. So our taxes should be going up because we're getting that money. There's a couple points I want to make. I grew up in a lake with 7 miles of shoreline and there were 1,000 households. We have 26 miles of shoreline, we have 488, 510. So I really, and of those 1,000 households, every house at that lake, even not on the lake, is now $1 million house. Ours was just a lot less than that, but the majority of the houses on the lake are not on the shoreline, but they're still in the taxes. So I think that we have too small of a base. And over the years, only 1 or 2 people have come and said, we want to join the lake, and we go, no. I think we need to add more households and reach out to the people. That's another point. The third point is I have been to a lot of fundraisers in Bloomington. I'm really active on volunteer networks. I go and volunteer. I was at a fundraiser for the community orchard. 2 acres of apple trees, right? 30 people at the breakfast. They brought in over $6,000 and just at the breakfast is free. Just saying, will you donate now that you're at the breakfast now that we talked about it. 30 people for 2 acres brought in $6,000 at one breakfast. I think that if we can really set our minds to it, we can get a lot of off these the fund. Now that we have this nonprofit group, we can get some fun fundraisers going. Like one time, Marty Graham proposed building a dance hall out here and renting it out to people. It's just somehow having events. I can see for a tax increase, I just want to keep it really low because I do have 7 houses at the lake, and I don't buy Starbucks, and I don't go out to eat, and I grow most of my own food, and I'm just surviving. My first house was $70,000. It's now assessed at $200,000 or $300,000. So my taxes are more than my mortgage ever was on that house, and every little $100 affects me. But I do, been here for 34 years and do believe we maintain the lake, but just want to be careful and want to see some fundraisers where we could get the people that have a $2 million house. It's a drop in the bucket for them to hand us $10,000, $12,000, $15,000. And I think once they know it's tax write-off, some of these millionaires will be able to give us money from these fundraisers.
Thanks, Gail. Thank you. Once again, I'd like to remind you to keep it as brief as possible. 1 to 2 minutes.
What do you think of it? Mike Spencer Lodger, first question, Adam, is there some place today we can donate to fireworks?
Yes, yeah, they can try to check, it'll be fine. They give it to Andrew here.
So, what, Marty, was it 2005 we started dredging? 2005 we started dredging, you increased our taxes, whatever percent, 200 some percent. We were told we had to increase these taxes to save the lake. Fact is, we have not been working, we have not been focused on saving the lake. We have, as Adam pointed out, we've been focused on providing access. I'm not saying that's good or bad, that's just the facts. But most people in my end of the lake think their increase was to save the lake. We're not doing that anymore. Now, we need to focus on saving the lake. Not only do we need to shift our focus, but we need to shift our resources. The resources that we were using to provide access need to be shifted over to saving the lake, as we were promised when we had the last tax raise. I know a lot of people here want access, they need access, the channels need maintained. I've seen these people come to the meetings, they're smart, they're passionate, they're active, they're organized. I am fully confident that they can organize and come up with alternative ways to get their channels dredged. My money needs to go to saving the lake. Well, my money, you're talking about my money, okay? It is our money, but they're talking $1 million. Now, you can say it's $100 a year. Well, crap. It's not $100 a year. There's 500 of us. $1 million divided by 500 is $2,000 out of every one of your pockets. That's on top of the $2 million we've already spent, which is $6,000 out of our pockets in the end. So it's a lot of money. And I think it needs to be spent on what Adam's talking about. And I think it has been for 10 years, that's how I felt. I feel passion for all these people, I do. I'm glad they have access, I'm glad we dug them out. But, and the other part of it is like Deborah brought up. It's like, you do not have enough information to justify raising my taxes now. There's no plan. It's like, well, we think we're gonna need this money, we don't have a timeline, we don't have items that we say it's gonna cost this much for converting the channels. If I went to my boss and said, look, we want to do this project and it's going to be like $1 million, start giving me money now without a plan, you'd be fired. And it's just, to raise our taxes this year without more information and a better plan is irresponsible.
I think we've addressed that to your point. That's what we've been talking about
Well,
at the
I just
table.
want to
We're
emphasize,
working
that's
on
my
it.
feeling as
We're
well.
working
And
very
I
hard.
appreciate it. The
Yeah.
discussion they had board on this was
Yeah.
excellent.
I also, like to ask you a question. I don't remember in the day when the dredging project began, I don't ever remember the term "save the lake" being used. Did I miss something?
I heard triage forever.
What's that?
Triage forever.
Well, I mean, there's,
because that's what we were
you know
doing.
what, if I talk to my neighbors, they're like, we got to do this safely.
I mean, I'm not questioning if that's what you heard, but I didn't hear
Well,
it.
okay, then why did we dredge west of Cemetery Island?
We did, we stopped.
We made,
Right, but why did we do that? Because we wanted the freeholders down there to feel like we're saving the lake, and we're doing something
that
for
was a
them.
mistake.
That was
That's the
not,
only
Safety
reason.
issue there, my friend. There was a safety issue there. There was a point about 200 yards offshore that was this deep and voters didn't know it. And they removed a small area right there so that nobody would
And
get
it was
in
hard,
trouble.
man, it was always shallow, like a lot of these places on the lakes, and you can make a safety issue by.
Sorry, I
By
apologize.
putting buoys up. There's a lot of.
Okay, all right. Your points are well taken. Thank you. Marty?
Hey, Pam. My name is Marty Mann. I was on the board for a long time. Was involved in the starting of the dredging project. Have quite a bit of perspective. Just wanted to share just a couple of brief points. Don't object to tax increases. I think reasonable increases have been needed and will be needed. 2 points I want to make. One is just to briefly reiterate, we call it the Lake Restoration Project. And it was clear that it wasn't channel dredging. Channel dredging was going to be something that we were going to do, thinking we could get done in a couple years, and then move the resources to the main part of the lake. Because of no one's fault, we've spent over $1 million dredging channels. Those channels dredging, if you get on the GIS and count the number of houses, it's about 120 residents that have really benefited from that $1 million. That's $8,000 per resident. The rest of us really haven't gotten anything out of that. Now, that's just the water over the dam. Nobody's fault. I think a lot of advocacy, you know, when you can't get to the water, you're going to join the board, you're going to make sure your channel gets dredged. We'll get to the lake later. Well, later is now. So without going back and dredging over old stuff, the thing that I want to point out is we dredged the channels. We spent $1 million, probably $1.5 million dredging channels. Now we're ready to take that money and put it to the main part of the lake. But now we've got to have another $1 million without even knowing if we have the resources already to go ahead and take care of the main part of the lake. And I guess one bone I had to pick with this board is when we started, we knew we didn't have enough money to dredge all the sediment out of this lake. So we killed ourselves not hiring consultants. We killed ourselves learning where the disposal sites are, how to buy equipment. We knew a bond issue was a huge waste of money because 40% of that money was going to lawyers. So we got rid of the bond issue thing. Now we're paying consultants big money to look at the same thing we rejected 15 years ago because we haven't gone back and looked at what has already been done. So my problem is the efficiency. You know, I think instead of using this tax increase to go out and hire a consultant, you can take their report, chop it up into confetti, throw it in the lake, and do as much good. We got reports gathering dust sitting on shelves. These consultants are going to do a bunch of pictures and concepts and, you know, sediment trap in Bean Blossom Creek, it's not going to work. You got water coming in at 10 feet per second, it's going to blow the sediment right out.
Marty, these are opinions. Are you getting to a point?
My point is, we don't have a blank check. You don't have a blank check.
Of course not.
Okay? Someone said, well, we need $1 million, that's just the down payment. Okay? We're going to have a lot of resistance if we start looking like we're not using our money efficiently. And the fact that we spent 12 years dredging essentially access channels and neglected the lake, I think we need to see what we can do with the resources we have before we start writing more checks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name's Dave Hobson, and I live there on the east end, and I, along with my neighbors, would again like to thank the board for the debris removal this year. I've been here 31 years, and that's by far the most we've ever had, especially the larger trees and more difficult to remove and so forth. So I want to thank that very much. Without that, it would be impossible to use the area. One thing I might say, though, is the voters should come by the area. More than was taken off the land area is out in the water, at least twice as much out in the water. It's knee-deep to waist-deep out beyond my dock. So I would warn everybody to kind of stay out away from that area because it goes from some places where the debris isn't. Where 6 or 7 feet, it comes up to 2 or 3 feet. So I would like to warn that. Anyway, thanks again, Adam. I appreciate it. It was a good job.
Thanks, Dave.
I'm Jessica Goodblood. I'm on the east end. I'd like to thank the board for being proactive, for trying to have a plan. I don't believe we've ever had a plan that was never shared with us that I was aware of. It's not 28.6, it's 26.8.
Right.
It's not $1 million right now. We're going to be paying for the increments of the bond. Eventually, all that will come to play. But I think the board is presenting a plan. They have options. They're not relying on their own self-education They're relying on people who actually deal with this. This board is not telling us what we want to hear. The previous interactions I've had with the board, with the whole lake management, they always told us what they thought we wanted to hear, and yet here we are in this situation. So I just want to thank the board for being proactive. Again, I see it as like a fire. It's not my money or your money putting out the fire. It's our money putting out the fire. And if you don't stop the fire where it starts, it's all going to be gone. And that's what it looks like. It looks to me like the sediment is spreading. All the reed bank area down there seems to be filling in. It's got to go somewhere, and it seems to be filling in at incremental rates. I don't know. That's just my opinion. Thank you to the board.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kevin Fagan. I live on Spillway, and probably just a question, Adam. When we get our selection of things that we're going to be able to afford, are we going to be able to put a percentage of chance that it's really going to accomplish what it is we're trying to get accomplished? Are we going to have a sense of that? Because I think that's going to be really important as we get to the point, which I honestly believe we're not there yet. When we get to the point that it makes sense for us to pony up to do this thing, we'd like to know, hey, what's the chances that it's going to do what we said we want it to?
Yeah, I think we'll absolutely be able to analyze once we decide what we want to do, what we think the benefits are going to be as far as retention, slowing down water time, and there's definitely methods to figure out how much benefit and how effective it's going to be. So yes.
Yeah, so I look forward to seeing that, because I think that'll be real fun.
All right, that brings us to new business. Our next meeting will be right back here, July 21st at 10 a.m. There will be no lunch, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't come. It will be the second time we talk about the budget amongst other things, and hopefully we will have some more of this information we've been looking for. With that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn, please. So moved and seconded. Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thanks for coming. Go eat.
Todd Fisher,